It started like any other quiet morning. The sun had just started to touch the windows of our family home, and I was preparing breakfast like I always did. Eggs, toast, and the same mug Daniel liked since he was 12. He was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone with a smile I hadn't seen in a long time. He seemed happy. Maybe that's what caught me off guard. Daniel had always been a good boy, respectful, kind, the type who never let a day pass without checking in with me. But in the last few months, something about him felt different. He started working late more often, disappearing for entire weekends without much explanation. When I asked, he'd smile and say, "Just work stuff, Mom." And somehow, that was supposed to be enough. Emily, his girlfriend of 2 years, still visited, but less and less. I always adored her, smart, thoughtful, the kind of girl you hope your son ends up with. She had this calming presence that balanced out Daniel's more impulsive nature. But recently, she had started arriving with tension in her shoulders and a forced smile. Her eyes didn't linger on Daniel the way they used to, and sometimes they didn't meet mine at all. I tried not to overthink it. I told myself that maybe they were just going through a rough patch. Relationships are like that sometimes. You ride out the silence and trust it's just a phase. But in my gut, I knew better. I had lived long enough to recognize the distance people try to hide. Something was off, and it wasn't just between them. It was inside my son. One night, Daniel came home later than usual. I was sitting in the living room pretending to read, though I was really listening for the door. When he walked in, I asked casually how his day had been. He smiled, said long, and went straight to his room. No hug, no eye contact, just vanished behind a closed door. Minutes later, I heard him laughing on the phone. I stepped closer and caught part of the conversation, soft, low-toned words like "missed you" and "can't wait." He wasn't talking to Emily. I stood there, breath caught, heart racing. I didn't want to believe it. Not him. Not Daniel. But I couldn't ignore what I heard. Still, I said nothing.
Not then.
I walked back to the kitchen, picked up his empty cup, and stood there washing it longer than necessary. A mother's instinct is hard to explain, but when it strikes, it doesn't go away. The next morning, Emily came by with a bag of groceries. "Thought I'd cook dinner for the three of us," she said. I thanked her, watching her eyes. She was trying, clearly, but her smile cracked in all the wrong places. Daniel wasn't home, though he'd said he would be. She waited 2 hours, sitting in the kitchen with me, making small talk that couldn't hide the heaviness in the air. When she left, I watched her walk down the driveway, slowly, as if dragging something behind her. I told myself I was imagining things. But I wasn't. Something had already started to unravel. I just didn't know how bad it was going to get. The first real sign came unexpectedly. I was cleaning Daniel's room while he was at work, something I hadn't done in years. But that day, I felt compelled. I found a small receipt tucked between books on his desk. It was from a hotel downtown, dated just a few days ago. One night, premium suite. The name printed on it wasn't his. It was charged under a different woman's name. Not Emily's. I stared at it for a long time, searching for a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was work-related, maybe he was helping a friend. But nothing fit. Not with what I'd overheard days before. I folded the receipt and put it in my pocket, unsure of what to do next. It felt like holding proof of a crime I didn't want to admit had happened. That night, Daniel told me he had a late shift and wouldn't be home until after midnight. But his car was parked just a few blocks away from the house. I saw it when I drove out to get groceries.
He lied.
I came home and sat in the dark, trying to decide if I should call him, confront him, or just wait. At 10:30, he still hadn't come back. The next day, Emily showed up unexpectedly. She looked tired, eyes swollen like she hadn't slept. She asked if Daniel was around. I told her he'd gone out. She didn't look surprised. Instead, she sat at the edge of the couch and took a deep breath before speaking. "I think he's seeing someone else," she said, voice shaking but steady. "I found messages.
They weren't meant for me."
I said nothing at first. I wanted to deny it, defend him. But the words wouldn't come. She looked at me, eyes filled with pain. Have you noticed anything? I nodded slowly.
Yes.
I have. For a long time, we sat there in silence. Then I told her about the phone call, the receipt. Her expression didn't change. Maybe she already knew. Maybe she just needed confirmation. Together, we decided to find out the truth. Not with confrontation, not yet. We wanted to be sure. That evening, I suggested Emily stay for dinner. Daniel came home late again. He barely noticed her until he realized she wasn't supposed to be there. His face shifted, surprise, then caution. They talked briefly, nothing serious. But Emily watched every move he made, every word he chose. Later, after he went to his room, she whispered to me, "He's hiding something. I can feel it." We made a plan. The next time he said he was working late, we'd follow him. It felt wrong, like spying. But betrayal is a kind of violence too. And we needed the truth, however ugly it might be. 2 nights later, he left again at dusk. Emily and I followed in my car, headlights off. We stayed 2 vehicles behind. My hands trembled on the wheel. Part of me hoped we were wrong. But deep inside, I already knew we weren't. We watched him pull into the hotel parking lot, the same one from the receipt. He didn't hesitate. He got out of the car and walked straight to the entrance with a woman already waiting for him. She was younger than I expected, dressed casually, confident. They didn't touch, but they didn't have to. The familiarity between them was obvious. They disappeared inside together. Emily sat frozen beside me. Her breath caught, her hands clenched in her lap. She didn't cry. She just stared ahead like her entire world had gone silent. I couldn't speak either. It felt like watching my son become someone I didn't know, someone I didn't raise. We waited an hour before driving home. Neither of us said a word. I kept going over the moment in my head, trying to find some detail that might offer another explanation, some version that didn't involve betrayal. But there wasn't one. What we saw was clear, undeniable. When Daniel walked in later that night, I was sitting at the table. Emily was standing behind me. He stopped cold. His eyes flicked from me to her and back again. He knew. In that instant, he knew we'd seen everything. I asked him to sit. He didn't. I asked him where he had been. He didn't answer. Emily stepped forward. Her voice didn't shake this time.
"We followed you," she said.
"We know." Daniel looked down. No anger, no denial. Just silence. Then finally, he said, "I didn't mean for it to happen like this." Emily asked the question I couldn't bring myself to ask. "How long?" He hesitated. 5 months. 5 months. That meant it started while he was still saying, "I love you" to Emily. While he was still sitting at our dinner table pretending everything was fine. I asked him why. I needed to hear it. I needed something that made it make sense. He rubbed his hands together, searching for words. I felt stuck. Everything in my life felt decided. I didn't know who I was anymore. She made me feel free. I wanted to scream. Not just for Emily, but for myself. For every night I worried. For every time I doubted my instincts and stayed silent. I told him he could have ended things honestly. He didn't need to tear 2 people down just to find his freedom. Emily didn't say another word. She picked up her bag, walked past him, and left. He didn't try to stop her. I didn't either. After she was gone, he sat down at the table across from me. I asked him if he loved the other woman. He said he didn't know. I told him that wasn't good enough. Not for what he had done. There was no shouting. No dramatic breakdown. Just a stillness that felt heavier than any argument could. My son had cheated. Not just on Emily, but on the version of himself I thought I knew. After Emily left, the house felt unfamiliar. Her absence settled into every room, like something had been ripped out and the space left behind couldn't be filled. Daniel stayed silent most of the time. He moved around quietly, avoiding eye contact, eating alone, barely existing under the same roof. I didn't force conversation. I couldn't. I was still trying to make sense of what he'd done, and worse, what it meant about who he was becoming. A few days later, he packed a bag and said he'd stay at a friend's place for a while. I didn't ask who. I just nodded. Watching him walk out of the door didn't hurt like I thought it would. It was a numb kind of relief. I needed space, and I think he did too. Emily didn't call, and I didn't expect her to. I wouldn't have if I were in her shoes. Her heart had been broken in front of witnesses. There's a certain kind of betrayal that leaves no room for second chances. I kept thinking about how she looked when she turned around that night. No yelling, no demands, just a quiet surrender. That kind of strength doesn't come from anger. It comes from finality. I started replaying everything in my head, how I raised him, what I missed, where I might have failed. It's hard not to take it personally, even though I know adult children make their own choices. But a mother always wonders. I remembered teaching him about honesty, about treating people with kindness, about never being the source of someone else's pain. And now here we were. Weeks passed. The silence between us slowly shifted from tension to something like understanding. One afternoon, he came home for dinner. No excuses, no stories, just sat down and asked how I was doing. I told him the truth. Not great. He nodded. Said he didn't expect anything else. Then, without prompting, he started to talk. He said the other woman had ended things shortly after the confrontation. Told him she didn't sign up for drama, didn't want to be responsible for what he'd broken. He admitted that losing both of them in the same week made him realize the damage he'd caused, not just to others, but to himself. He said he wasn't proud of who he'd become, that he didn't recognize himself anymore. I listened. I didn't forgive him, not in that moment. But I did hear him. And maybe that was the first step. In time, we talked more. Not about the affair, but about his choices, his fears, the parts of himself he'd ignored for too long. He started going to therapy. Started working on being accountable, not just saying sorry, but understanding why he needed to. Emily moved on. I saw a photo of her online months later, smiling next to someone new. She looked peaceful. I was happy for her. She deserved it. As for Daniel and me, we're rebuilding, slowly. Some things change you forever. But sometimes broken trust becomes the reason people finally decide to grow.